Blackbeard, the most feared name in pirate history. 4 ships, 300 men. Now let me tell you about the woman history barely speaks loud enough about. At the height of her power, Zheng Yi Sao, also known as Ching Shih, commanded a fleet consisted of approximately 400 junks and between 40,000 and 70,000 pirates across the South China Sea. Not a legend written in exaggeration, but a documented maritime force that forced an empire to take her seriously. The Qing Navy tried to suppress her repeatedly. They failed. Regional and foreign-aligned forces that entered the conflict struggled to contain her fleet. The most powerful empire in Asia had to sit down at a negotiating table and beg her to stop. She was born into a world that owned her. Ching Shih was born as Shi Young in 1775 in the poverty-stricken society of Guangdong Province in southeast China. No silver spoon, no noble bloodline, no inheritance. In a society that treated women as property, she was born at the very bottom of the pile. Upon reaching puberty, she was forced into sex work to supplement the family income. She worked in a floating brothel, also known as a flower boat, in the Cantonese port city. Now here is where most people stop the story. They see a young woman in the most powerless position imaginable, and they look away. But Ching Shih didn't look away. She watched. She watched the merchants. She watched the military commanders. She watched the royal courtiers who came through those doors, carrying their secrets along with their coins. She quickly became famous in the area due to her beauty, poise, wit, and hospitality, attracting several high-profile customers such as royal courtiers, military commanders, and rich merchants. She didn't just sell company, she collected intelligence. Information is power. And in 18th century China, a woman on a flower boat was sitting at the center of more information than most generals ever saw. Ching Shih understood this. She cataloged it. She used it. She was running a shadow intelligence network before anyone even knew her name. The deal that changed everything. In 1801, a man sailed into her world who would change the trajectory of her life, and whose own legacy would eventually be eclipsed entirely by hers. In 1801, notorious pirate commander Zheng Yi encountered 26-year-old Ching Shih in Guangdong. He was enthralled by her beauty and her ability to wield power over her well-connected clients by trading secrets. Zheng Yi was no ordinary criminal. He commanded the Red Flag Fleet, one of the most feared pirate organizations on the South China Sea. He had ships, he had men, he had power, and he wanted her. Different reports state that she either willingly accepted a marriage proposal or was forcibly abducted by Zheng Yi's men. What is clear is that she asserted she would only marry him if he granted her 50% of his earnings and partial control of his pirate fleet. Read that again. A woman on a floating brothel with no army, no title, and no legal standing looked a pirate warlord in the eye and said, "Half or nothing." He agreed. History does not record whether he ever regretted that decision, but the evidence suggests he should have. Building the empire. Together, Ching Shih and Zheng Yi did what no one before them had managed. They united the fractured warring pirate clans of southern China under a single flag. By 1804, they had united 5 numerous fleets into one gigantic confederation made up of 70,000 men and 400 junks. Historians who studied them closely noted that Zheng Yi was the unifier and patriarch, but Ching Shih was the consolidator and organizer. He brought the clans to the table. She made sure they stayed there. Then in November 1807, Zheng Yi died, either in a typhoon or in battle at sea. The historical record is not certain which. What the historical record is certain about is what happened next. Every man, every captain, every warlord in that confederation assumed the fleet would now collapse into war, each squadron fighting for dominance. That is how it always went. That is how power always changed hands. But Ching Shih had other plans. The widow who inherited the ocean. Within weeks of Zheng Yi's death, Ching Shih had taken the fleet's commander, Zheng Bao, her late husband's adopted son, as her ally and eventually her lover, solidifying the relationship through marriage. This was not sentiment, this was strategy. Zheng Bao commanded fierce loyalty among the crews. By binding him to her, Ching Shih neutralized the one man who could have challenged her authority and transformed him into her most powerful weapon. She didn't eliminate her rival, she married her rival. Then she got to work. Under her leadership, the fleet flourished and dominated the South China Sea, raiding ports, terrorizing merchants, and effectively controlling maritime trade routes across the entire region. At the height of her power, those under her command numbered between 70,000 and 80,000 men, women, and children across more than 2,000 vessels. Her largest war junks weighed almost 600 tons, mounted up to 30 guns, and carried 300 to 400 men. She had built a floating nation, and she ran it with the precision of a seasoned head of state. Any plunder seized had to first be presented to the fleet and registered before distribution. The ship that captured the loot retained 20% of its value, while the remaining 80% went into the fleet's collective fund. This was not lawlessness. This was an organized treasury system, more structured than what most governments were running. Country people were to be paid for provisions taken from them. No pirate could go ashore without permission. Abuse of women was forbidden. She understood something that every great leader understands. You cannot hold power through fear alone. You need loyalty. And you build loyalty by making people believe the system works for them. The coastal villages didn't just tolerate her fleet. Entire villages worked for the fleet, supplying them with goods and food. Any ship that wanted to cross the South China Sea was taxed. She wasn't a pirate, she was running a government. The Qing dynasty, the ruling empire of China, was not amused. Mandarin Navy vessels were sent out to confront the Red Flag fleet in the South China Sea. After just a few hours, the Mandarin Navy was decimated. China sent a second fleet. Same result. 3 Chinese imperial flotillas were defeated. The Imperial Chinese, British, and Portuguese navies could not bring Ching Shih to justice. In 1809, China's increasingly agitated government borrowed well-armed vessels from the British East India Company and the Portuguese Navy simultaneously, essentially assembling a multinational coalition against a single woman's fleet. Let that settle over you for a moment. the Chinese Empire, the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, all three together against Ching Shih. She was still not defeated. The British East India Company, the most powerful corporate military force in the world at that time, had to negotiate a working arrangement with her rather than face her fleet in open water. The negotiation that humiliated an empire. By 1810, the Chinese government made a decision that no empire makes willingly. They offered amnesty. The Emperor of China, humiliated that he was being outsmarted and outmuscled by a woman, negotiated a peace deal with her. Ching Shih walked into those negotiations not as a prisoner, not as a supplicant, but as a commander who had never been defeated. And the terms she extracted reflected exactly that. She negotiated a surrender to Qing authorities that allowed her and Zhang Bao to retain 24 ships and a portion of their wealth. Her crew were allowed to keep their loot and avoid prosecution. Much of her crew was even able to secure jobs within the Chinese military itself.
She didn't surrender. She retired on her own terms, with her treasury intact, her men employed, and her freedom guaranteed. In comparison to Blackbeard, who commanded 4 ships and 300 pirates and died in brutal combat at 38, Ching Shih walked away from commanding more or less 1,800 ships and 80,000 men with everything she'd ever earned. The life after the storm. Most pirate stories end with a noose, a blade, or the bottom of the sea. Ching Shih's story ended with a gambling house. She relocated to Macau and opened a casino and got involved in the salt trade. She lived peacefully until her death at the age of 69 in 1844, surrounded by her children. She outlived her enemies. She outlived the dynasty that tried to destroy her. She died wealthy, comfortable, and free, which is the most radical thing a woman born on a flower boat in 1775 China could ever have achieved. Some of the gambling businesses existing in the area today are said to be run by her descendants. Even her money outlasted her legend. Not every revolution announces itself with gunfire. Some begin quietly, on trade routes, in ledgers, across deals made where no one is supposed to have power. And sometimes they're led by someone the world has already dismissed. Ching Shih didn't wait for opportunity. She built it, rising from the lowest rung of society to command one of the most powerful forces in the South China Sea. Poverty tried to limit her. Power tried to control her. Empires tried to stop her. None of it worked, because in the end, the most dangerous weapon isn't a fleet. It's discipline, strategy, and the refusal to accept the role the world assigns you. And that's something no navy can defeat. History buried Ching Shih under centuries of silence. If her story just changed how you think about power, about women, and about who gets to be called great, then share this video. Because the only way the forgotten become remembered is if we refuse to let them stay forgotten. Subscribe, because every week we pull someone like Ching Shih out of the footnotes and put them exactly where they belong, at the center of the story.